Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Joint Committee on State Building Construction. We have quite a few things on the agenda. That's why I was waiting until 10:30 on the nose, right? It's for Representative Anderson. All right, first victim for today's slate is the Department of Commerce. And we have Mike Bean, Deputy Director. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Representative. We've provided, again, Mike Bean with the Department of Commerce, we've provided written testimony for your approval. At the core of this, we are requesting that we dispose of a building located in Salina, Kansas, and one in Dodge City. Both of these locations are former workforce centers, paid for, predating me almost, back to the early 60s, paid for by federal workforce dollars, continued to be supported with federal workforce dollars. According to USDOL's guidance, the proceeds, if any, after all the expenses are paid, will go back into the federal workforce grants. I'll stand for any questions.
All right, Representative Dumperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do we currently have workforce out in them areas, just operating on a different building? Our own property?
Yes, much more. Particularly with Salina, for example, I think it was February 2021, we had a substantial cold spell. Unfortunately, this all occurred over the weekend when nobody was there to monitor, maintain, but the heating system shut down late Friday, wasn't able to restore itself. The boiler shattered because of the freeze and estimated several thousand, if not tens of $1,000s in plumbing damage throughout. So in that particular case, it's much more cost effective to go to a different location. The mall was the lowest bid that we received. So,
am I to assume then that that's the reason that the highest bid was $120,000 below its appraised value?
correct. Yeah, we can all wrap our head around the estimate to repair the boiler and HVAC system and the unknown plumbing condition within the walls and the restrooms and kitchenette. The estimates are between on a low end 120,000 for repair, on the upper end 250,000 to repair. So, yeah,
It's a big HVAC system.
a lot of it is the unknown in the brick wall. So,
right, yeah. That makes sense. Senator Billinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So how long did you own this building in Salina?
It predates me. It's back into the early 60s, I think, is when all of the quote workforce centers were supported with federal dollars. So it has some dust on it, let's say.
Yeah. So you had it appraised at $172,000.
Correct.
Was that recently?
Yeah, within the last 6 months.
And they knew that the problems in the wall, and they knew the heating and so forth?
Yes, sir.
Well, that's quite a discrepancy. I mean, I've never been to the building, but $50,000 for a commercial building sounds like a very, very low price, especially when it's appraised at 172.
Right. Both locations went through the appraisal process, and they were sold in an auction, live auction. Full disclosure of the condition of the buildings at the time of the auction. Both in talking to both appraisers pre-auction, they did recognize, particularly in Salina, the abundance of office space, and then also the condition of the building may affect the sale price.
Seems to be like Salina's got a lot going for it right now. I mean, just me, but it seems like Kubota and
Right.
expansion and pizza. I mean, it seems like a going place. I don't know. I wonder if this is something a guy ought to hold on to until the market changes. And if you're blaming it on the market, but I have real concerns when we have an appraisal recently of 172,000. We sell this at auction for 50,000. That just looks really, really bad to me.
I fully appreciate your concern, Senator. But I think the unknown factor of the condition of the HVAC system and the plumbing system throughout would make me personally, as a buyer, skeptical of bidding that high of a price.
How many square foot is this?
I don't know. Estimate around 1,500 to 1,800.
And location?
If you're familiar with Salina, it is directly, let's see, get directionally challenged a little bit in Salina, directly south of their police department facility, directly behind or directly west of the old school in Salina. So pretty close to the downtown metro, just a block or two off of that.
And the way you were speaking earlier, it sounds like it's brick, block.
Yeah, it's brick construction, block with a brick veneer.
Flat roof.
Yep.
Is it mostly offices, or is there overhead doors, or?
No, it's if you will, a great room in the middle and surrounded by offices around the edge, 2 restrooms and a kitchenette break area.
Are there any overhead doors? So it's strictly office space.
Yep.
Thank you.
Right beside the cinema circle. By the way. Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree. I think the low bidding is kind of a concern, but then again, right now it's tax exempt, correct? So once it comes back to the tax rolls, whatever they put into it will probably, we have nothing coming in right now, so something is better than nothing. So if they're going to renovate, I would assume that cost is going to fall on them, or whatever grants or whatever they're going to be using for this. So that's always a plus when something that wasn't there for the tax rolls and it's coming back on. I'm not very familiar with the area, but I assume if that is your highest bid, how many bids were there?
If I remember right, at the auction there were 4 bidders. In a live auction, all it takes is 2, but one was the aggressor, and the others just didn't feel necessary to go any high with the unknown of the plumbing and HVAC system.
Okay, well, that makes sense. I think if that is your highest bidder out of 4, because it's not one and only one either,
Right.
that there was some other circumstances that maybe stopped the other bidders from going any higher. But I think whatever comes back onto the tax rolls is always a positive, so.
Yeah, the exact, to kind of put it in perspective, the exact opposite case in Dodge City, there were multiple buyers, multiple people interested, and 2 very interested. So that's the increase in price for that location.
Yeah, I noticed that we probably made up some of the loss on the first one with the second. So that's a bonus. Now, there was kind of an interesting route that it took to get to this committee. What you want to describe it? When I read the State Finance Council agenda, it said that it had already been passed by this committee.
Well, I don't know about that, but I do know.
It did say that. I read,
Okay.
yeah.
I apologize. I do know we are not, this is all new territory for us at the Department of Commerce as disposal of buildings. In the path, we learned that we have to seek U.S. Department of Labor approval to dispose of an asset paid for by federal workforce dollars. So that took a little bit of time. We also learned in the process that we have to have 2 independent appraisals. So again, that took a little bit of time, unknowing, because it was all new to us, reading through the requirements of how to dispose of buildings. We failed to recognize, and our fault, that it should have came to this committee prior to going to the State Finance Council. So we will apologize on that behalf, thus the reroute back to today.
Gotcha. So it was just an assumption that it had passed
Right.
this committee.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
And you know what assuming things does. So
You an umption.
yeah.
All right. Very good. Of course. Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the second time up. And you already told me this, but I'm in Salina. Is that the one that's in the mall or is that a different one?
So that's where we relocated to.
That's
in
one
the mall.
in
Right.
Salina.
Right.
What are you currently paying for rent?
I don't know. I can follow up and get you those numbers. I don't know.
Generally, mall space is not cheap. That's why I'm
Right.
questioning. So,
Right.
because you take this $50,000 and eat it up in 1 year's rent,
No,
potentially.
not there. I don't think. No, it's an inclusive lease. Run one price place for, not only the upkeep and maintenance of the facility, but it also includes utilities. So it's for us a much more cost-effective relationship with the landlord.
Is the mall currently used for retail operations, or
There's a mix. Yes, there's retail in there. There's also another mix of community-based organizations in the mall. And
because I would personally like to know what the rent is on that. And the
Okay.
reason I'm asking, I used to have retail stores, and I paid upwards of $10,000 a month for certain spaces.
Yeah,
in
I don't-
malls,
I don't think it's anywhere close to that.
but you don't have an
I'll
answer.
get you
for me.
that.
So,
Yeah.
okay, and then thank you, Mr.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is probably something I should know as well, but don't. Who would cover the cost of rent? Would some of that be coming from the federal government, or is that all?
So these, like, I'll use Salina as an example. There's 2 partner organizations located there. We have staff there with the Department of Commerce, and also the local Workforce Development Board has staff there. So we share in the cost of that. Those are all, quote, federal workforce dollars that share in the rent cost and operational cost of the centers.
Thank you. So some of the funding will be coming through those workforce. Dollars.
Both Salina and Dodge's example are 100% supported operationally by federal workforce grants. So.
Senator Billinger.
Thank you. Did you guys even consider listing this with a realtor? I mean, it seems like these are folks that appraised are probably in the real estate business. It just seems to me like when we're that low, did you consider that at all?
I would defer to our colleagues at Department of Administration, but based on our guidance from U.S. Department of Labor, they prefer the live auction competitive environment at that point instead of the cost associated with a realtor.
Well, I understand that, and I'm not against the auction part. I'm just saying when your auction brings you, a third of what you thought you was going to get,
Yeah,
that you might say, well, wait a minute, let's just go ahead and list this with a realtor and see if we can't
right.
get closer to the appraised value.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, but during the time of the sale, we'd also and are currently responsible for the upkeep, maintenance, and specifically lawn maintenance and utilities of these facilities. So keeping them in hand is costing right now.
It's costing $120,000.
No.
No, I just don't like the way this all shook out. I mean, I've done a lot of real estate business, and this looks bad. Thank you.
All right, and we have another person here in the gallery excited to share some information. I think on the auction itself, I believe. If you could introduce yourself, that'd be fantastic.
Good afternoon or morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members.
5 o'clock somewhere.
Bobby Cosmala, Department of Administration, Office of Facilities and Property Management. Senator Billinger, to answer your question, we do look at the properties when they're declared surplus by those state agencies. Typically over the recent years, it has found the most achievable methodology to obtain the highest values on these is through the auction process. There were some previously done before I took this role about 7 years ago where they went through the sealed bid process or even through a local realtor, and they ended up canceling those and going back and putting it out to auction. They found that they were better prices that they could obtain that way. With the building in Salina, I will also go ahead and add that there are no windows at this facility, and it is roughly about 5,000 square feet. Both the appraisers and the auctioneer services that we dealt with both did express some of the challenges that that building would have, going up for auction in the Salina area as opposed to the Dodge City location. So there were those instances also where they did factor in the extensive repairs, and early on, I believe that those were estimated to be anywhere from $50,000 to $60,000, not just like 10 to 20. So that's another reason why Commerce made those decisions to go ahead and declare that property surplus.
Thank you.
Yes.
So explain to me why they would have valued that at $172,000 when there's no windows, no air conditioning, and all that. I mean, I guess that's the problem I have is they looked at this building, it had no windows. They looked at the condition and they knew that the air conditioning was not working, and yet they valued it that much.
So there were two sets, as Director Bean did report. There were a couple different nuances with this one. Since the U.S. Department of Labor were involved, we were required to go back and get a second set of appraisals for these properties. And the first appraisal for that property came in at $172,000. The second appraisal really factored into those HVA repairs, and their appraisal came out at $82,000. So it's, still not as good as where we would have liked to be with an outcome. But when you only have, the four people that were interested and then only two of them were bidding against one another, you don't have a lot of competition going against.
So you did have different appraisal values on this.
Yes, Senator.
Okay, I didn't know that. So
I wanted to go ahead and include that information for your.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Kazmala, when you said that there were no windows, do you mean that the windows were blown out, or on the front? I'm looking at the front of it. There are no windows. There aren't supposed to be.
Correct. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
There are no windows at the building, so that's another challenge. If you're going to make it into like a dental office or something of that nature, they could obviously punch, those penetrations into that. But those were some of the challenges that the auctioneer and some other the professionals in that market did say that would kind of bring the value down.
Gotcha. I was thinking you were saying that the windows were blown out of it or had been stolen or something. I don't know. They're just brick.
And there was plenty of advertising. It was sent out marketing. It went to 2,600 people through their mass mailers. There was 4x8 signage out in the yard for months. There was open houses. Contacting the local board of realtors, the local chamber of commerce. So, we did our due diligence in trying to get the best price. But then, on the same side, keeping this property at about, they estimate Commerce about $4,000 a month to keep it mothballed, doesn't help down the road as well.
Representative Delverday.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Have we looked at possible other uses within the state? First thing I'm just going to pick on, I know the Highway Patrol has their big training center up there. Could that be a use for them with a building we already own? And have we even considered such stuff?
That hasn't been considered for this location. I mean, we do try to do co-location opportunities in certain cities where there either is a new building going to be built or a renovation, where we might look to stick a couple agencies that have similar business models. But in this particular instance, no, it wasn't looked at for that. They do, as you recall, they do have several locations in the Salina area.
I can't really tell what that building is across the street from it. Looks like a pretty giant building. All right. I think that wraps it up. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, any further questions regarding the sale for either Mr. Kazmala or Mr. Bean? Seeing none. Okay, very good. Let's move on. Let's go to the Adjutant General's department. And I have my glasses off. I have no idea what I'm getting ready to say. We have Ken Weisar. Now that's an entrance. Welcome to committee.
I brought all the smart people with me, so if you do have a question, I'll have to turn around and.
There you go. That's my secret too. That's my secret too, by the
Oh,
way.
yes,
All
yes.
right.
Chairman, whenever you're ready, I'm ready to.
I am ready to go.
Awesome. So we're going to talk about the update on the Hayes Readiness Center, which we're excited about, and obviously want to thank this committee and all the legislators for appropriating the funds. So if you've all got your slides in front of you, we'll turn to that purpose slide. So again, we're going to talk about land acquisition, design, and construction. Most of this briefing will be centered around the land acquisition because that's where we're at in our process. And then we'll talk the way ahead on where we're at with design and then follow on construction services. So the next slide talks about prior coordination. So who have we talked to and what have we discussed to get to this point today? So we talked to the Kansas Military Board, and we'll talk a little bit about them as we go through the brief about what their legislative and oversight is of the Adjutant General's Department, but they did concur with our proposal for the land acquisition. Adjutant General obviously has concurred. General Venerty, General Mohat is our Assistant Adjutant General for the Army side. We've got the Director of the Joint Staff, which is Colonel Schneider. The Chief of Staff is Colonel Mike McCoy. And then our federal officer that will really help us get this building into the federal inventory support plan, which provides federal money to provide the O&M dollars later, is Colonel Oline. So we've got concurrence across the board. So the next slide kind of talks through the outline. So we won't go through all 7 sites that we looked at. I will show you an overview of all the land availability that we had, that we did tour and take an analysis of, and then we'll just kind of really go through the site that we selected that we're actively working through to procure. So some of the background information, General Venerty and I thought it was important to kind of talk the committee through the oversight that we have. So we're not a bunch of renegades out there buying land. We are the Army, and we do like to acquire and take land depending on the situation. But National Guard Bureau will have oversight and does have oversight. So they validate all of our space requirements. So if you say, Ken, why did you pick this weird number of 49,000 XXX square feet to build? That's because there's design criteria that authorizes space. And so for us to pick that up, once it's built and get it into that inventory plan for federal support, we just need to make sure that we don't break any of our authorizations. So we do have limits and authorizations that we have to abide by. And then really the allocation of space. So as they look at our design plans, when we send those up, they'll validate that we didn't go over our authorization as a building. And then for each one of the stakeholders in there, they validate that as well. And really the other point to that would be our building splits. So as the building is completed, we get different levels of split funding for restoration, modernization, our operations and maintenance. And again, they validate all that on the front end. So when it comes time to pull that up in our plan, we don't have any issues or concerns. They also will look at our land acquisition. So we've got a little bit of criteria that we've provided throughout this brief on what criteria I have to use as we select land. They also do an environmental screening. So one of the special provisions you'll see in the briefing is that the land will have to meet our DOD criteria for environmental screening to make sure that the department, as an extension of that, the state, isn't picking up property that has an environmental concern. And then they also review our design documents from a code review perspective. So both OFPM at the state level and the national level review to make sure that we comply with code. And then the Kansas Military Board, again, they have statutory oversight of our entire real estate portfolio. So before we went and tried to acquire the land, we had approval from the Kansas Military Board. So that's got 3 folks appointed by the governor. And then we've got 3 senior military commanders that are voting members of that board. And they did unanimously support the property acquisition pending the 3 appraisals that are required by statute. So that's kind of where we're at today. To continue on the next slide with the oversight. So the Department of Administration. So whether it's the real estate services, the appraisal services, design services, or as we go into construction, they'll have oversight through that entire process. So they'll actually work our bid solicitations. They'll work through some of the committees here to make sure that we get properly vetted and shortlisted, and then we'll make acquisition services from there. And then with OFPM, they'll help us with administration oversight. They'll do code compliance. They'll actually visit the site and do inspections, and then they help us with closeout. And although it's not on the slide, both of these teams have been excellent to work with. I've been in this job since 2014, and I think we have a great relationship between our department in construction and D of A. So the next slide. So what are we going to build? Again, that 49,792. That is a very specific number, but that's what we're authorized based on the stakeholders that are going in there. Currently, why are we building the building? That's basically a DA-directed stationing when we got the 997th Brigade Support Battalion to the state. And really why? And that's because the building has a 250% utilization as it sits today, which is really hard on a building when you talk about exercising more than what it was engineered for, and it's 70 years old plus. So it's an aging facility in our portfolio. Continued background information. This is our proposed schedule. So this is kind of how we see the schedule working. Our intent really is to have the utility infrastructure and design phase run concurrently as best as possible. So that way, when the utilities are in, and we'll talk through that, the design is ready and we'll be ready to break ground out in Hayes. So again, just some facts that we looked at, just so you have an idea of what shaped our decision process. Again, it's a 250% facility utilization. We have worked through design acquisition services. So HTK Architects was selected for that. And then thanks to the legislative body here, we had 18.135 million for us to design, construct, and procure the land. So that's where we're at with that. We look at the next slide. This is just some regulatory guidance. So if you say, Ken, why did you do this? Or if someone has a question about why the department did what they did. So it is the state's responsibility to procure the land. So whether it's a federally funded building, a state funded building, federal government expects the state to purchase the land. And then we will need a disposal strategy, which is currently in staffing. So as we look at when the new building comes online, we've got a field maintenance shop and an existing readiness center there that we'll have to determine what the disposal strategy is for those. And again, that's really still in staffing. We're a couple years away from that, but it is something that's being worked. So again, the budget that we came up with doesn't include the operations and maintenance detail on that. But once we get it under our inventory plan, again, we expect the federal government at a minimum to provide 50% of that. Our guidance on, why did you buy the land that you bought, 15 acres versus, the entire site was 58. There's minimum design guide, which says 15 acres. There's not necessarily a max, but in order for us to get federal support, aggressive but not greedy was kind of the route we took. So as we look at co-locating our field maintenance shop, that 25 acres gives us enough room to build the readiness center. And then if we are able to build a new field maintenance shop, we can co-locate it on the same property. And we don't have to pay all that utility infrastructure twice. So the next slide on things that are, and these are really directed by regulation that is solely my responsibility on behalf of the TAG, which is to look at all the land that's available, ensure that it's going to support unit readiness. You have to look at the current and future zoning of that land, which we'll talk about as we go through the special provisions, any economics that are around the site, and then any of the other effects, specifically environmental is a key one for us because that can be a cost driver if we're not careful on the front end. So if we look at the special provisions, we do have a draft document that we have that includes these special provisions. So again, when we briefed it to the Kansas Military Board, they approved it pending the 3 appraisals, which are required by statute. And those appraisal services are directed by D of A. So they'll tell us who we're going to use. So that way we're not out, trying to solicit our own appraisal services, which I think is good oversight. They're also responsible for platting. They're going to be responsible for rezoning that. So they're already working that from ag to industrial. They're responsible to get it annexed into the city of Hayes, which the property is currently not. We defined utilities, so they'll be responsible as the seller to get all the utilities to the site. And we felt it was important to define what utilities meant to us. So we have shared understanding in the contract. So that'll be gas, water, wastewater, sewer, and telecom. And that all must apply to code. And that's all very specified in there that it has to meet code. So you're not putting in a 4-inch line and that does us no good and we have to tear it back out just because they want to save money. So I think we've tried to think through all that. And then really the environmental condition of property is something that the government will be responsible for. So my team will go out there, we'll hire an independent third party to make sure that we don't have any environmental concerns, not just from a potential oil spill, but natural and cultural resources. And we'll run the entire gamut on any environmental concerns that we may have. And I don't think at this point, we believe we're in good shape. So the COAs, the courses of action that we looked at, there were 7 sites. So this map just kind of gives you an overview of the 7 sites. So when we look at land availability, we did look and conduct analysis on all 7 sites. We'll just go through the one that we selected. So as we screened out, how do we get from 7 to 2 or 3 that we actually looked at and did some really significant staffing on, we looked at site cost. So anything that was going to have a land acquisition cost and a development cost was really that utility infrastructure over 2 million. We said that's going to be too much. There was one of the properties in here that they wanted 130,000 a square acre for. And so when you work that out plus utilities, it just became cost prohibitive. And that's just more than what it would appraise for anyway. Site suitability. So most of the sites that were screened out, in fact, I think all of them either had wetlands or flood zones, which are not good for construction. So we screened those out. And then anything that we couldn't either get to fit that kind of that 15 to 30 acre. Some of the properties were larger and they really didn't want to go in there and rezone that or plat it out. So it was land that we didn't need, we felt was kind of a waste, or it was too small and it wasn't going to work. So one of the sites was only 9 acres, and so it was screened out. So if we look at the screened out COAs, so really COA equals site. So if you just look at the map and look at 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, they were all screened out for those criteria that we use. So it was either going to cost more money, or we had excessive wetlands or flood zones. It was really the two, or they wouldn't, or it wasn't going to be the right size. It was going to be too small, or it was going to be more than what we really needed and could validate on the requirement. So we had 3 really surviving ones. So if we look at site 1 and then we look at site 2, 2A is really the north 25 acres is what we ended up, we'll talk you through. And then the south 25 acres on site 2 is really kind of how we had 2 Alpha and 2 Bravo. So our evaluation criteria, how did we decide between those 3 sites which one's the best? And this is really the criteria that we used. So if you look at your evaluation criteria, the site acquisition, our benchmark again was 2 million. So more above 2 million is bad, less than 2 million was good. And so that's how we scored it. We felt that was kind of a weighted criteria cost. And so it was more heavily weighted than some of the other 2 criteria that we used. On site suitability, really, is it a suitable place to build a building? And so that really centered around the flood zone or the wetland areas, because there is a cost to move. You have to either recreate the wetland on site or you have to pay a fee to move it. And so site 1 actually was going to cost, if we procured it, we were going to pay at least $150,000 to move that wetland somewhere else. And so we knew that was going to be a sunk cost if we chose that piece of property. And on the northwest edge, it also had flood zone. So that was kind of the criteria we used. Is obviously we don't want to disturb wetlands or build on a flood zone. So that's how we screened or evaluated that. And then the final one was the site size. We looked at what was a reasonable size based on our regulatory guidance, knowing that we wanted the future potential to build. And we did want a little bit of land for a local training area. So that way soldiers can train right there in Hayes versus driving to Fort Riley or another location. So what we came up with was really COA 2A, which is the north half of the property on site 2, which is what we'll talk about in depth. So it did have a lower acquisition cost across the 3. It does give us potential to future build the field maintenance shop. It does have the least risk when it comes to environmental concerns, both actual risk and potential risk. And it does have I-70 frontage. So from a recruiting standpoint, we're not ocean front, but we're ocean view. And so we felt if you drive along that I-70 corridor, you see our National Guard Readiness Center, it may be able to draw recruits and be able to build strength out in that unit. So the next slide is a picture really looking from I-70 to the north. And so that's the piece of property. As we get to some more detailed slides, there's only 3 elevation contours that go across that property. So it's relatively flat. It does slip a little bit from north to south, which is good because everything rolls downhill. So we'll be at the kind of the top of that area there. But again, it's a nice flat piece of ground. It's currently egged, as you can see there, but it just kind of gives you a picture of what we're looking at. The next slide is more kind of that engineering slide. So when you look at the next slide, you can see where the I-70 corridor is. You can see the green block on there is really to scale where we intend to put the readiness center. The black lines on the left and right, or as if we do a future build out. It was important to us to tell the engineer and architect team up front, we want to plan for a build or at least have the potential to build, whether we do or we don't. It just relies on mission analysis, but we do have room. And then the kind of that facility that looks north and south. If we do put our field maintenance shop and move it from its existing location to here, we can put a 5-bay there, and we've got enough space to be able to run traffic and big trucks. And so that was important to us as well. So, and then really that left side or that west side would be kind of a little training area for them to, again, to be able to train there versus spending all that time getting from Hayes to Fort Riley or to Salina, and be able to get some good realistic training in. So I can talk more in depth about how the utilities are laid out, but if you can kind of see on that graph, it will be the seller's responsibility to get to the utilities in site. So out of the purchase price, we're going to give them $100,000 in earnest money, but they don't get the rest of it until it's done. So we'll go out there with our engineers, validate that the utilities are in, they meet code, we have the drawings, and that's really to protect us. And so as we push the burden for the seller, they're motivated to get the work done because they don't get paid. And then all the risk is on the seller, because I think the biggest concern for us is the sewer comes from the south side of I-70. And so to bore a 12-inch sewer line underneath I-70, we'll let them assume the risk on that. So that's why we chose the method that we did. You look at the wetland analysis on the next slide, a clean slate. And so when we looked at really environmental concerns from wetlands and some of those things that we would have to move, zero issues with this site. We did do an initial analysis on natural and cultural resources that came back clean. Obviously, we'll go more in depth, but our first sweep of this, it's a good piece of property. We've got some advantages and disadvantages on the next two slides. I won't read those to you. I've kind of tried to talk through those, but I think the biggest advantage for us is it's a piece of property that we can build on. The cost is reasonable based on what we saw out there. I think if the notes that I sent back was the median price for land out there was $50,000 an acre and up. And so it was more expensive, I think, than we initially thought it was going to be. But this piece of property will be $50,000 an acre, but that's all utilities brought to the site. And you're looking at most of the property out there was $50,000 to $130,000 with no utilities to site. And utilities to this site, you can plan on $500,000 to $800,000 just to get utilities infrastructure, especially the sewer line coming underneath I-70. So with the seller having to provide utilities, when Mike and I met with them the first time, we got them from their initial offer, counter offer. We came down about $305,000 after, say, an energetic meeting, Mike, with them. So we did reduce $305,000 from their initial offer, and we added in that they had to get the utilities there. So I felt like aggressive negotiations, but not to the point where they would just walk away from it, because with the limited property that's available, they have somewhat of an advantage too. Again, the disadvantages, there's not access right off I-70 to that site, but as I understand it, there is a programmed off-ramp for that site. So at some point, I think we can have the negotiations with KDOT and to see if they'll actually build that infrastructure there that would lead us there. So the comparison of COAs, kind of the so what that takes us. So this really is just kind of a snapshot of the site acquisition costs for the three, the site suitability, which shows the 2.5 acres on that first site, 0 and 0, that we would have to mitigate or remediate, and then really the site size. The 18 acres would have worked, but we felt 25 was better, again, to give us that future potential build. So the advantage for the 2 Alpha, even though they're running utilities farther, the price is less, is because it was important to the seller to have that frontage. And it's not important to us, quite candidly. The farther up the hill we are and back we are off I-70, the more anti-terrorism force protection that we have for our building and for our soldiers. And so for us, it was a win. You're going to charge us less money for the property that we really want anyway. And so we can mitigate some anti-terrorism issues by being a little farther away from I-70. So really the way ahead, these are some dates based on where we see land acquisition coming. Right now with June being kind of our closeout month, we're in a standstill on getting purchase orders for our appraisals. And those are 75, 90 to 90 days out. So it just extended our schedule a little farther than what we wanted, but this should give the committee a pretty good idea of where we think we're going to land with our land acquisition, our design services we have contracted. We'll start some programming while the utilities are going in, but I'm not going to cut them loose until I know that we have the land, so we don't have that money that's kind of wasted, really. And then where we see construction land, so we anticipate about a 2-year build based on a 50,000 square foot building, and that's about what we've seen in some of our other facilities that we've purchased. So really, in conclusion, this project is going to provide us more capacity. We won't be at that 250% mark. It'll provide us a much newer building that will be more energy efficient. Right now, we have kind of some old school legacy systems in there. This will all have a geothermal ground source. So it'll be much cheaper to run as far as operations and maintenance costs. It does give us the potential to build. And based on the project costs that we've seen so far, they're reasonable and fair across what we've seen across at least first year Kansas over the last 3 or 4 years. So pending that, if you've got any questions.
All right, questions from the committee? Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a few questions, and some of it's just needing more information, or maybe you already stated it, but I was wondering, you talked about Hayes doing the utilities. What is the cost of that? Do you know?
So the cost of that was rolled up in, initially the bid that we looked at was a separate bid for the land and a separate bid for the utilities. And I think it was 865 or 869. I can get you the exact number, but we have an engineer estimate that we got from an engineer firm in Hayes. And so that was much higher. It was reasonable based on market share. And we ran that by 2 other engineers that we had, but it wasn't really kind of what we were briefed. We felt like it would be a lower cost. And so that's when we went back in, negotiated utilities as part of the purchase and lowered it from, again, it was 860 something. I can get that for you, but that's where it's around to that $500,000 mark. And so,
And the city of Hayes is going to pick that up. Is that right?
no, the seller is responsible to pick that up, and the seller is also responsible to make sure that the utilities get approved by the city of Hayes. So there's actually a utility committee, and they're responsible in the contract to not only provide the utility infrastructure as part of the purchase price, they're also responsible to make sure it gets all the regulatory guidance in the city of Hayes for annexation.
Okay. And you mentioned Fort Riley, so I'm unfamiliar with what Fort Hayes has right now in that surrounding area. And you indicated somehow this would relieve some of the readiness programs from Fort Riley and extend it to the new training space. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
Well, ideally, so a lot of our units across the state will drive to Fort Riley or to Salina, or some even drive out of state for training. And so all that time really, when I was in 38 years, you're sitting in a bus, you're not getting training value, but that still counts against your training time that you have. So ideally, if we have a local training area, they're called close-in training areas now, but we have Coffeyville, we have one out at Lake Perry. They literally can walk out the door and train right there on site. And that 2 hours they would have spent in a bus, maybe doing something other than sit on their phone, they're actually going to go out and do some training. So it's not really necessarily taking away from Fort Riley, but it's just being able to spend that time effectively versus, again, Pittsburgh, Kansas is a great idea where we don't send driving from Pittsburgh all the way up to Fort Riley. We have a local training area in Coffeyville. So all that time, that travel time is centered on actual training our soldiers versus, again, just waiting to get to their training site.
Sure. And I'm not sure what the training encompasses, but I know in the city of Manhattan and Riley County and with Fort Riley, we have a JLUS plan, the Joint Land Use Plan. Is there anything like that indicated in this building or structure with the other communities?
We don't yet, but I think at this point, we're so early in the process, we haven't reached out to any other of the community stakeholders. Ideally, again, we would really own that piece of property. Sometimes when you have those joint use agreements, they're really great. And sometimes if that piece of land is already committed that weekend, it's difficult. It's not impossible to change your drill weekends, but it's challenging. And so this way we would literally own that and we would own the schedule for it.
So one of the things that came from the Joint Land Use Plan was the noise and sound barriers, because when they are training, it literally shakes up Manhattan and the noises, and people needed some heads up. When is that going to happen? Because whether they have children or dogs or family members, it impacts their lives on a daily basis. And also to put something on some of those real estate where they're building houses, that this is with where they might feel more of the training pressures and such. So whether there's all of those indicators are in discussion for this piece also.
We did. So I think the dynamic, and I lived in Wakefield for a number of years, so I'm very familiar with the gunnery range up on the north end of Fort Riley, and I started out as a tanker. So I think the difference between what we have at Fort Riley is there's no impact area that we'll have in Hayes. So there'll be no weapons ranges, there'll be no tanks, there'll be no big artillery equipment. So I think we've mitigated that just by the stationing of the unit we have. It's a battalion headquarters for a mate, but really they do logistics and maintenance. And so other than air compressors and an occasional truck rolling through, I think we're going to be able to mitigate any noise just by virtue of the mission set that's there.
It's a different type of readiness training.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. And since the state is going to be, the ask is about $2 million or a little less than $2 million, is that correct?
The money has already been appropriated. And so the fully burdened cost, when we talk through that 18.135 was land acquisition, the actual construction, and that what we would call the tails piece. So that includes all the furniture, all the fixtures that we need, all the equipment that we would need. And so when we made the $18.1 million ask, it included all of that. And that really is to be transparent. So we don't come back and say, we have a building, but now I need money for furniture. I can't use it. And I think that's, well, my personal belief is that's not being transparent with everyone. So our ask was a fully burdened turnkey cost.
One last question. What is do you know the economic impact on Hayes or the state of Kansas from this building?
I don't have that information, but we can get that. Our property and fiscal office team captures that by location. So I know that we have that information. I just don't have it with me.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
Senator Billinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today. Appreciate your presentation. So did you end up with 15 acres or 25? You mentioned both.
The minimum standard for us in a non-congested area was the 15. So the agreement that we currently have that's pending is 25.
For the 25.
And so if you look at the map that looks kind of more like an engineering map, that boundary with the dashed line represents our 25 acres. And then there's the boundary line within that is kind of our anti-terrorism standoff.
The print was so small I couldn't tell.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
That's my poor eyes.
Yes, sir.
So we're 1,250,000 at 50,000 an acre, correct? And that includes the utilities?
We were at 1.3.
1.3.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that's more than 50,000 an acre on 25,000 acres, or 25 acres, excuse me.
Okay, I apologize for that.
So 62,000 an acre? 52? I couldn't hear.
Okay, I apologize for that.
Oh, no, that's all right. I just doing quick math, so it's 1.3.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And on the existing facility, will that be something that will be given to the community or sold? How do you disperse of the old one? Because that's right on Main Street. It's in a flood zone.
Again, this is somewhat pre-decisional, but the maintenance facility that currently exists on that site is extremely outdated. And so some of the discussions that are being had was, do we dispose of the field maintenance shop and turn the existing readiness center into a field maintenance shop? And so the building that would potentially be disposed would be the field maintenance shop versus the existing readiness center.
You'd still be in a flood zone.
It would be, but the challenge that we have now is when that was built, we were still running quarter-ton Jeeps. And now we have these great big pieces of equipment that won't fit in the maintenance base.
I've been there. It's yeah. I'm amazed that you could even do what you're doing there. I mean, it is very, very, very small.
But there are disposition strategies, both based in the title and then obviously would work through D of A because there are oversight for the disposition of those facilities. And so we would work through D of A on, if there's not a valid requirement for us to keep it, then we would work through D of A to do proper disposal. Some of those have reversionary clauses back to the city. Some go back to the potential landowner that donated the land originally. There's a lot of issues that we would have to work through, but
that's why I was curious. I knew there's a lot of different ways. So are you asking to move the whole facility at some point in time with the extra land you have, or?
Ideally, we would like to have those co-located, which is why we thought we would, kind of foresee and get that extra 10 acres potentially. to get us from that 15 to 25. Currently, that's not the next military construction project in the queue, but I certainly see us, especially with Hayes being where it's at, kind of that regional hub for that northwest part of Kansas. And so ideally, we'd like to see that field maintenance shop there. But initially, I think if we can get the Army's that's a huge win, I think, for us when we look at that footprint out there.
So are you even asking for that, or is it just kind of later on type issue?
It'll be later on. So right now, the next ask from the federal government would be a new aviation facility in Salina. It is really kind of our next number one priority. And because we just got the Joint Force headquarters, that's probably 6 to 8 years out minimum. So they tell us about every 7 to 10 years, you can expect a new building on the federal side.
So the old facility will be there and be used for quite some time going forward.
The old facility, sir, once we move, we're going to have a disposition strategy settled before we're ready to move into the new building. So whether that's us asking for the renovation money, which is much easier ask than a new building, to renovate that into a maintenance bay, those decisions need to be made probably within the next 12 to 18 months. It's just a different funding stream, and it doesn't have to go through quite as many hurdles as we do with a brand new big building.
So in these new buildings, are they still block and brick, or using steel? Or
Sir, it depends on the budget. We've done both. Most of our additions, I would say, are kind of that steel girder construction, just because they're cheaper. And if we only need a 5,000 to 8,000 square foot addition, but if we're talking a 50,000 foot building, it'll be brick and mortar.
Thank you.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate your mentioning the geothermal as part of this. And I'm sure you know that Hayes has a reputation for doing an extraordinary job with water conservation and good use of that water. So I'm hoping that you will be thinking about that as well, as part of the both design and use.
That's actually a requirement as part of our construction. We have to have a plan to retain the water that we have on site. So I know the city of Hayes has some specific requirements, but that is actually one of the things we're responsible for as part of the design. So we've got a civil engineer, BG Consultants, that's their job, is to help us write that plan. So yes, ma'am, that's a requirement.
So is that a rain catchment system? Is that what you're talking about, or?
We're going to let the engineers figure that out. Some of it's a detention pond. I understand when we actually went out to Hayes, there's a lot of ditches out there that you don't see in some other communities, a way to retain water on site. But I know part of our requirement is whatever you have on site today, you build that, you have to capture all that. So really all the water runoff from the parking lots, all the water runoff from the roof, we have to detain somehow. And that'll be either a detention pond, probably in that northwest corner, which is why we wanted a little bit extra land, because we won't be able to use that, or whether it's a catchment facility or.
Depends on what you're trading.
One of the ideas was actually a catchment facility underneath the parking lot. They do that quite a bit at K-State. So we're going to let Mr. Pat Cox figure that out for us.
There you go. Right. Further questions? Seeing none. That was easy. Thank you very much for being here.
Sir, and I think we'll see you this afternoon at the Joint Force headquarters, providing it doesn't rain on us too bad.
Exactly. All right, next up. We have speaking of I-70 and access to the facility, we have Department of Transportation. And we have Robert Fuller speaking to us today. Welcome to committee, Robert.
Thank you. Chair, committee members, I'm Robert Fuller, Chief Bureau of Maintenance at the Kansas Department of Transportation, and here to talk to you today a bit about our District 1 project, and specifically, as it says on the schedule, the reuse of some stone. But if I may, I'd like to start with a little brief history of the project and kind of where we are today. I've got some slides. There we go. This is the existing District 1 headquarters. It was built in 1936 with additions in, excuse me, I'm going to have to put the glasses With additions in 1958, 1961, and 1985, we first began to look into replacing this facility at about 2005. And after considering various sites, we settled on 21st and Rice Road with the construction in 2 phases, a phase 1 shop and a phase 2 administration building. Some members of the committee, this is an approved project. We do have the appropriation. And so some of the committee members may have seen some of this before, but again, I'd like to just go through the history. The district shop itself is pretty small, and our equipment is too large to fit inside. As we just heard from Edgerton General, they have the same problem. This picture I just took on Monday when I happened by there, and there's 2 vehicles were being worked on outside of the shop. So, and on the inside, it's also the equipment that does fit in there. It makes for pretty tight operation, and this is not just about comfort, but it can be a safety issue when you get a crowded shop like that. This is our site at 21st and Rice Road. The circle there. There's about 12 acres in the corner. This was leftover pieces of right-of-way from when I-70 was realigned. The turnpike ramp used to go right through there. If you can see up there on the screen, you can still, you can't, but anyway, you can still kind of see where the ditches went through there as it connected to I-70. That was realigned in, I think the project completed in 1999 or 2000. To facilitate this, we're going to have to put in a sewer connection that'll go in the right of way along 21st Street there and connect down the hill. That is part of the project. The complex itself will fit in there at the corner of Rice Road. We're at this point, we're just finishing the programming stage of this. We haven't got into the actual design of the building yet. And in fact, we just had a progress meeting yesterday. And so we're just about complete. The programming is just about complete. But anyway, that's where the complex would fit. Looking at that a little closer, it's a schematic of it. The orange part is the actual shop, the working shop. That green box is the managed stockroom. Some of our stockrooms are actually managed by the private sector. And then the administration is the blue there. The administration would be the second phase of it. And that's just a schematic of how the site, we hope it will work. You can see at the top of that too, there's a purple block for a potential materials and research center that has not yet been appropriated, and we're still in the programming. Hey. This was some other options. This is option 2 and 3. Like I said, we just had a progress meeting yesterday, and we pretty much settled on option 1. So these are just some of the other things that we considered, different configurations. That is where we surplus equipment these days. Instead of going through state surplus, we put it on Purple Wave. People come out and look at it themselves, pick it up at our shops. And it's, yeah. And that has worked pretty well too, I might add. Yeah. And here's a schematic of the building itself. Option 1, as I said, that's what we've settled on as of our progress meeting yesterday. It just gives you, those are just blocks. There's no design here yet, but shows some of the office space. And again, the orange is the shop proper. The green is the stock room. Blue is the administration area. And then that part that's in gray and light blue at the bottom is restrooms, mechanical room, so forth. The shop itself, the shop is really our most pressing need. We need to get that built first. So that is phase 1 and should lay out something like this. It's ends up being about 26 to 28,000 square feet. It'll be a pre-engineered metal building, and which we've built a number of for our other locations, and they work out pretty well for us. The schedule looks something like this, And we are, as you can see, in June, we're just finishing up programming. Then we have some supplemental tasks, some environmental, some drainage studies and so forth, platting it, and the other site preparation. But concurrently, we'll be working on the design itself, as you can see down at the bottom. We hope to have construction documents finished by the end of November, and we hope to have the project let by the end of the year. Okay, now to the subject at hand, stone and reusing stone. Last year, when we were interviewing architects for this job, we were out at District 1, and we were trying to kind of brainstorm on how can we, it's a beautiful old cut stone, limestone building. How can we bring some of this history into our new building? And one of the things we thought of was that big Sunflower One there. It used to be the Division I shop. And we thought, could we salvage that from the building and maybe, work it into the new building? And, the city of Topeka is very interested in this building. And we thought, well, do we leave a big hole there in the top of the building, or, what would it take to really get that thing out and really salvage it? And then right after that, I had a conversation with Frank Burnham, and he said, well, we're salvaging limestone from and some other things from docking. And so I was like, wow, what a perfect opportunity. Frank, I stole your slide. But the limestone is what we're particularly interested in. These are some of the palette of salvaged items that they're salvaging from docking. But it's limestone that we're particularly interested in. And there's a little bit of it that's cleaned up from the docking. On the top is what they call greenstone, and then the limestone, of course, is on the bottom. But that is, as I said, what we're most interested in. But the bottom line is we want to do what makes sense. We don't want to build a building around trying to salvage something. We want to build an economical building that's useful for us. And if we can fit this in, that would be great. And I think we can. This came to us early enough in the design that I believe we can do this. And I think it can be really, really nice. And I like the historical value of it. But as we're also currently working on the Gardner sub-area. That was a sub-area relocation that we're doing outside of the CIP. We were in an airport, I can't remember the acronym now, but some zone at the end of the runway. And they want to do some expansion at the New Century Airport in Johnson County and wanted us out of the way. So they're going to build us a new sub-area in the industrial park at the airport, which is actually a better location for us, by the way. And that's ongoing now. But Johnson County has some fairly stringent, I shall say, zoning requirements. And one of them is going to be a wainscot on all the visible sides of our building that we're building there. That's another potential use for this limestone. If for some reason we can't use it at District 1, or if there's enough, we don't even know yet, we could potentially use it there too. And so I think this is a great thing, actually. And I guess with that, any questions?
Well, I do have some questions, and I know it's early in the process. You may not, the numbers may be fuzzy right now, but how will using salvaged material affect construction prices?
It is early, and the district administration building is a district administration building, and we wanted to make it something a little bit more substantial than just a metal building anyway. I mean, most of the district buildings are more substantial. We're not building a museum, it's not a monument, but it is a kind of a big thing. And so all along we've talked about dressing up the outside of this building with either some kind of stone or some other material. And I think this could fit right in. I can't say right now what the cost would be, but something like this has been in the plan all along. And that's what I meant by making it practical. We don't want to do it just to do it.
You know, something else kind of obviously piqued my personal interest when you're moving out from the Gardner facility there. I had heard rumors that the McDonald's was going to have to move as well. Were you part of that discussion, or?
I was not, and I cannot say definitively, but I will tell you, I heard something similar to that too, because they're right next to, they're right next to us, and there's something about the work they want to do with the runway that they want that place clear. So they may have to go too. I don't know. I cannot say for sure.
Not upset by that, but well, and not just because it's a McDonald's, but because the intersection there gets very messy. And so I don't have a problem with moving that. I just hadn't heard anything since 5 years ago when that discussion started.
I can get back with you.
Yeah, that'd be.
And I agree with you on that intersection. That's one of the advantages to us moving out of there is less of our traffic, and it is just not the best intersection.
Exactly. And I welcome you to the air center. I'm out there every day. So.
Thank you.
Representative Alcala.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The limestone building looks familiar to me, and I'm getting older. I can't remember the location of it. What's the location?
21st and Van Buren.
21st in Van Buren. And the city of Topeka was interested in that?
They are quite interested in it.
For what reason?
First off, for the shops are what they're most interested in, because they're being displaced by Polk Quincy. And if we can get them into those shops, it'd be a real win for the city of Topeka. And it's not uncommon for us, as I guess this committee knows probably better than I do, it's not uncommon for us to retire our old property to another unit of government, a city or county or even school boards at times.
Yeah, it looked familiar, and I just couldn't place it. But now
What was a close up?
I know where it's at now. Thank you.
Right. Further questions, committee? Representative Douglas.
Just a simple one, because I know you got 21st and Rice Road here, but you had mentioned there was comments on Gartner. There's comments on building codes up in Johnson County. Where's this going? What city? There's no mention of it.
It is.
Is it Topeka?
It is Topeka.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I didn't say that, did I? Yes, Topeka, Kansas.
Specific other than 21st and Rice, and there's several 21st and Rice across the state.
My apologies.
So, okay. But so when you were talking about Johnson County building codes, that's for reusing of the stone at some other project?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You may have mentioned this earlier, and I was looking at something else, but I see on the new phase 58,000 square feet for the shop. What's the old shop size?
Well, I think I can tell you. If you give me just 1 second here. $32,000 square feet.
Nothing else. Okay, Representative Alcala.
Yeah, to the representative's comment, that's in my district. And so it's mainly industrial around that area, and there's a lot of leftover green space from who knows where, and some trails run through that area also. So it would be Rice Road is right before Croco Road, and it's kind of secluded, believe it or not, in that area back there. But there's a mobile home, not a mobile home, what do you call it, where you take your RV and camp out there, site there, and a barbecue place. I figured a lot of legislators would know where that is. So right over the top of that hill is the location, right?
Correct.
Food, you see, you got associated with food. Yeah, so I don't think there'd be any issue with it being there. Trying to help you out.
Thank you.
All right, further questions? All right.
Thank you.
Seeing none, thank you. Thanks for being here.
You bet.
All right, committee, we are actually a little bit slightly ahead of schedule. We have 11:45 scheduled for Department of Administration update on docking. Now the lunches are here. So the question would arise if we want to take a break now to eat lunch, or do we want to power on through and get the lunch? I tend to agree with you. I just didn't want anyone passing out on me. There you go. All right, let's power on through here, and that way we can eat with a clear conscience. Next up, we have the Department of Administration update on the docking building, and we have Frank Burnham, previously referenced, to address the committee.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I'm Frank Burnham, Director of Facilities for the Department of Administration. Um, Robert stole a little bit of my thunder, but I'm certainly going to give you an opportunity to lift one of those pieces of stone during the afternoon tour if you think you can. Okay. I've got two different updates here. I think I'm going to start with the KDHE lab, unless that messes up Shirley here. Okay. KDHE Laboratory, as was approved by the legislature, we started that process back in February of 2022 with the design. There's a timeline there, both presented by the architect, or I'm sorry, the contractor on page 2, and on page 3 it actually shows prior to bidding it what Clark Anderson, our programming consultant, had estimated. And the purpose there is to show you that we are right on time, if not a little bit ahead of schedule. Which is a great story for any construction project in today's market. I must admit the timing of both these projects, both the approval, the procurement, and the contracting was spot on, because we are now seeing, as I have mentioned before, a tremendous amount of lack of professional services, contractors available. So we got in just at the right time, and I think we are really benefiting from that. The great thing with the site down here, it was an asphalt parking lot, which as we go down there today, those that take the tour, you're not walking into a huge mud hole like you would on a traditional site. So that's been another positive that's allowed this project to move fairly quickly. The contractor really started breaking ground in March. Again, we were kind of eager to get going, given we've been working on this for multiple years, and now we understand why they were waiting until they were ready. The construction manager process of the delivery of materials, the usage of the site, and just the systematic way in which the building goes up is really showing us that we've made the right decision here in the delivery method. We have the right team. The earthwork, that was an old neighborhood, as you recall, that would have been asphalted over. They just kind of crumbled the houses into the old foundations was kind of the method there, and put an asphalt lot over it, and the state inherited it. We were fortunate not to run into a tremendous amount of hazardous materials. On average, we took out about a 5-foot average lift, compacted back. And that allowed us to get our concrete started right away. So for about the last 4 weeks, we've been pouring concrete as the site was available. They're just about done with all the concrete work. Again, ideal for the weather conditions we're having right now in Kansas. So again, things could not be any better. The steel showed up last week, and as we go down there, in just 5 days, they've made significant progress in erecting the building, and it's coming in the different phases in there. And so they're laying it as the underground work and the other stuff's taking place. So again, I encourage you, if you're available this afternoon, walk down there. We will be meeting at the north end gate. We'll have an opportunity to see a mock-up that they're constructing that'll show the actual construction and some of the materials. There's an opportunity to talk to the superintendent on site, ask any questions. And for those that might want to get up a little bit closer, we have PPE available for you. It is a little bit muddy as you get right up close to the building, but I do think you're going to be able to really see something great in that progress. Probably most importantly is we've now completed all 3 phases of the bid process. In the construction management process, there's multiple bid packages that go out. Obviously, your footings, foundations, your steel. That one went out, it was awarded, the Department of Administration reviewed it. And then we went into the building systems, and we just finished package 3, which was for the site work, some of the interior finishes. All 3 right now are still coming in and trending slightly under the estimated construction costs that we had advertised at $60 million. We've also taken steps as a Department of Administration to procure things independent of the contract, like the generator that's going to run the building. And as we suspected, the 2 bids we got was 80 weeks and 120 weeks. You do the math, 80 weeks puts it here about 3 months before we cut the ribbon on the building. So there was an advantage to procuring that. Not only that, but we also were able to do it as a tax deferment as a direct purchase by the state of Kansas. So we are getting creative in trying to help stay on schedule and maintain this. Probably our next challenge is also now starting to think ahead about the decommissioning. and what to do with the existing facility out at Forbes, which we will not have a need for as a state. So there's still a tremendous amount of work. Everybody's excited about the new building, but you just don't get up and move out. You still have a whole nother process to go through. So we're working closely with our partners at KDHE on those next steps. So with that, I will pause for any questions on KDHE before I move on to docking.
Questions from the committee? I am interested in what you're doing with the old facility as you move out. You said you're working with your partners. What's kind of the thought process? What's going on? Are there any preliminary notions as to what will go on with that?
I think we're still trending on surplus and removing the property from the state, turning it back over so it goes back on the tax rolls. In addition to the old building out there, which is actually older than docking, there's 30 acres with land, and that's a very highly developed area out there. There's a lot of stuff happening in that area around Forbes Field. So I think that's probably going to be our recommendation. With that, then obviously the building still has hazardous materials, asbestos, lead. So there are things that we're doing behind the scenes to make sure we have all that information and we have a full picture and understanding before we make a recommendation or start to engage.
All right, thank you. All right, further questions? Seeing none. All right, well, let's move on.
Okay. It's funny you reference the sound from the Readiness Center. I mean, obviously you hear our jackhammers going behind you today, which is progress. Just about the time that this session was wrapping up is when the major demolition really started to get underway. We started back in roughly January, February timeframe. The process included going through doing all the hazardous abatement of the lead materials, the floor tiles, and getting the building basically gutted on the inside. Prior to that, we did stuff to assure that the power plant would be able to continue to function. So we diverted the stacks and we were able to operate. So a lot of things were happening before you get into the physical demolition of what you're seeing today. And while all this is happening, we're still working with the design team to finalize the design, the details, the exhibits. So I think that'll be a future presentation. I'd be happy to come back and talk more about how that's evolved, what those public spaces are going to look like, some of the creative ideas. So today I want to focus mainly on the process of the demolition, recycling materials and so forth. So I put a few slides together there. Some of this is from the interior. Obviously, we're not going to be able to go in the building today due to what's going on. So we are going to meet over at the site. We're going to meet at the south gate there. We'll probably be able to see some of the stone and stuff that's there, ask any questions of the job superintendent, get you up a little bit closer, but we will not enter the building. So therefore we will not require the PPE. But again, great opportunity just to get up close. The first pictures there, again, are kind of showing the tower crane process and the means and methods by which the demolition contractor is taking the building apart. The robotic things are exactly that. They're little robotic machines that walk around with jackhammers attached to them. And there's guys up there with remote controls, and those guys are all tied off. And so they're using those devices to basically chip and knock that structure down to the floor below, at which case then it's pushed to the north elevator shaft. So the north elevator shaft, they were creative in creating an interior chute out of that. And further here in the slides, you'll see where they've created what's called a diversion plate on the second floor. So they're essentially pushing the material, it drops down, and then they can push it out the second floor. And when that's when they sort the aluminum from the steel from the general debris for hauling it off. So again, we did not specify the means and methods. This was the contractor's creative trades. And so we're really pretty excited about the way this is coming together. Once it's chipped away, you get into the steel structure, and then from there, it's all craned down. Slide 4 shows a little bit more about the equipment that they're using. I think at one time we had over 100 people working on the job on a daily. That number's down a little bit now with the abatement, but that number will fluctuate. Page 5 shows a little bit the diversion plate and the process for pushing that material out. Item 6 there, again, shows kind of that pre-process. A lot of these spaces were just left after the state walked away from them, so there was a lot of material that had to be pulled out, so a tremendous amount of prep work before you get into the real demo. And that middle slide there again shows those the granite and the marble panels that used to clad all the interiors. Everything has been intentionally removed, carefully categorized, and shipped and prepared for reuse in the building or other state use wherever we can find a means. Slide 7 there shows a floor after it's been completely gutted. You can see again where they've pulled the concrete and fireproofing away from the steel structure for demo. The middle slide was actually a mock-up. So the first floor, as I think I mentioned in a previous presentation, is now the roof. So those were waterproofing test mock-ups to make sure that the membrane was going to hold. They've included floor drains in there now, so eventually it can rain in the building and still keeps our basement and our people in the plant in the dry. And then 8 is the limestone. So as of today, we have moved 1,460 pallets of limestone from the site. Those were taken off by guys with skylift jacks. Those weighed anywhere from 250, 300 up to 400 pounds per panel, roughly 2 by 3 foot, different in other similar dimensions. That material was all loaded on pallets, and it is currently being shipped to Silverdale Quality Stone in Silverdale, Kansas, where it is going to be cleaned, prepped, and reused. Robert took one of my slides, but you can see that today when we walk by the trailer when they clean that stone up. It's beautiful. It's just amazing what it looks like when it comes back after it's cleaned and rehomed. In addition, we have grainstone veneer that was on the curtain wall. To date, we've taken over 28,000 square feet of that material off. A lot of that material will be used back on the interior as we reuse both it and the red marble. The next slide are the stone reliefs, and I know that was a big concern we had of how we were going to get those off. And so they've got great stone masons that were out here, and we did a lot of research. They did lots of laser scanning. In the end, we have now pulled off all 3. They are going to be reused in the new plaza development ground-mounted elements. They're over 12 feet tall. It says here that they were between 7,000 and 10,000 pounds per relief. So just a tremendous amount of work to get those off. The contractor was able to construct those steel skids that you see there in the center photo to safely store those. And they're actually over here in the parking lot that we'll walk by. They do have protective enclosures around it, but you can still get a sense of the scale when it came off the building, just how big those things are. So. Our next slide, I wanted to give you an example of what, I know it's right before lunch, but that middle slide there is the condition of all the below ground waste and drainage piping in the sub basement. And that was pretty much found throughout the building. So our contractor has had to saw cut the floor. This is again the sub basement, remove all of that material out, dig it out by hand or with these small pieces of equipment. They've now got it all back in place. We're currently pouring that, and that was all done without disruption to the power plant and the chillers. So it's just a tremendous undertaking and coordination effort of our contractor and our team to do this amount of work and keep this building up and functioning. And then finally, the picture on the left was kind of one of those milestones. You always hear about the topping off of a building. Our contractor actually had an untopping, which was the first beam to come down, which was really a great opportunity. And they had a lunch for their team and invited some of my team over. So that's just a great first step. And then in the center there is one of your colleagues, Senator Bowers, along with Patrick Zollner. That was the time capsule that was removed as part of a ceremony. The State Historical Society was there. And then on the right are the contents that were removed from that perfectly pristine copper box that had not had any moisture in it, handmade. It was interesting. There was statute books in there, things they were really important, I guess, in 1958 or whenever it was put in. The parking rules were in there, and it's funny how parking is still such a big deal, but apparently that was a big deal back then. And then there's some 8mm or some films in there too from the original construction. All that material has now been turned over to the State Historical Society for purposes of incorporating into some new exhibit within our building or something else with the State Historical Society. So just again, another nice. And then the last one I don't have a picture of, but there was been asking people, what are you doing with the glass? So there's 60,000 pounds of glass that's come out of the building that's also went down that interior chute, pulverized. It is being shipped out, and it is going to go into terrazzo flooring that will go back in the building. So again, we're staying true to our original design and intent by recycling and reusing as much material as we can. Therefore, we reached out to our partners at the Department of Transportation about the opportunity, once we determine our quantities, how can we reuse some other materials on other state projects? And when you see it in a 6-inch form, our contractor can cut that into 2-inch slabs, so it can become a veneer. So when transportation talks about wrapping their building, it's probably more of a veneer or an entrance. We're looking at the signage for the new laboratory over here. We're looking at ways to use it for our protective walls around our facility. So we're looking at all different ways that we can reuse that material in creative ways. And the greenstone we'll see today, we're actually talking with State Historical Society. There's an interest in using that in some of their patios for some of their state sites. So again, all options are on the table. We're going to try to do our best to see what we can do to reuse this material.
Now, if I'm remembering correctly, the greenstone is pretty expensive stuff if we were to try to go purchase it to utilize it for our construction.
Extremely durable material. Again, you'll be able to kind of touch it and see it over there. When we first took our first piece off, we sent it over to KU, to their geology department, and just try to get more information on it about how it could be reused and how dimensional stability and so forth. So,
Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple questions, if I may. We always heard the building was full of asbestos and so forth. So where is that disposed of? What goes, where did it go? What happens?
I'm going to ask Jim Renner to come forward. He's with Bartlett and West. He works with Hutton. I think he can speak more to some of those specifics. Over the years, we did take a lot of it out as far as pipe abatement and stuff, but there was stuff that was in the walls that had to be dealt with. And I think Jim might be able to speak to that as a contractor.
Good morning, Jim Renner, Bartlett and West. Yeah, specific to the disposal of the removed material, I can't tell you that offhand where that goes. The abatement contractors are required that goes to basically Superfund kind of disposal areas. So it is tracked from the point of bagging. All the materials get bagged into labeled bags, clearly known to be asbestos material, and then it gets loaded into trucks and taken to specific hazardous material waste disposal like that. But I don't have that information, but I can get that for you if you'd like.
I was just curious.
Just curious
where it ends up and whose burden it becomes now that we're done with it, so to speak. So yeah,
it's my understanding that that material is kind of maintained as the owner's material by documentation anyway over the years, but it's really put into a place where it's stored and properly disposed and managed in that location too.
okay. And if I may, while I've got you here, my office here at the State House kind of looks out onto it. So it's been really interesting watching the deconstruction process. But how are you sitting with the timeline? It looks like some of this has gone really slower than what I might have thought it would. And so it's kind of a question when you get into the construction of the original building, was there any gotchas? Was it maybe constructed in ways that's a little harder to take apart than what you anticipated?
Well, looking at the building before starting the demolition, we thought that there were a lot of gotchas in it already. So we were anticipating quite a few challenges throughout. But it's really gone very smoothly considering the kind of demolition that's required for the building. Probably one of the things that took the most consideration in pre-planning and execution management were the removal of the stone reliefs. And that just by nature of the way they were anchored, the way they were installed, didn't allow for an anchoring method that they used to install it. It's our understanding that that stone was placed on the building, carved in place. So any anchoring that was there to install that stone was taken away with the carving. So we had to develop some anchoring systems to remove the stone. And then just by the nature of the weight, it was 9,000 to 11,500 pounds. So, and we didn't want to lose control of one for sure. So we were being very careful with that. And then, of course, now storing on the A-frames, it's been important. But as far as schedule, you know, we looked at this entire year as a demolition year, basically from January 1 through December 31. And we're really tracking right on track with what our expectations were. Looking back, everything seems to have been a little more manageable in the demolition of all the interiors, all the asbestos abatement, all the ceilings and mechanical systems and stuff like that. We're into the structure now. The roof began to get removed pretty methodically, looked like it was going along pretty good. And we get into this center core of the building where the elevator shafts are and the penthouse and everything. It's just a very concentrated amount of steel and structural members in there, and it's taking a little more effort right there than what we necessarily expected. But I was just talking with our superintendent this morning. He said, you know, I'm always nervous, but we're really right on track, and we've got the schedule planned, and looks like we're going to continue on and be right on track for the end of the year. So that's our expectation.
And then that, when the whole project's completed, my understanding it'll be a 3-story building sitting on that site.
Yes.
So on this, are you taking it down to the 3rd story, or are you taking it all the way down and then rebuilding
It
new?
was down to the first floor slab. That's Frank was demonstrating the waterproofing of the first floor, and that's why that's the case. That ends up being our roof until we start building the new building up and protecting with the roof.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, further questions? Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned a few things about reusing certain stones and such, even the sculptures that were there. Are we looking at reusing them as a state, or are you looking at auctioning them off for others to reuse?
You speaking of the sculptures or?
And the stone, you mentioned the green stone and the limestone. There was talk about using the limestone in another area, but are you looking at also auctioning any of those things off?
Short answer is no. We would not be able to sell state material. It's really the property of the contractor. Once it's removed, it's part of their means and methods for disposing of that. With that said, we are working with them because if there are opportunities for the state to use it, we won't necessarily ship it clear to Southeast Kansas. We may send some over to KDOT for them to use for their future planning. So they are still open to use of materials, but where it goes from there once it leaves our custody is really up to the contractor.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Majority of it is obviously going back into the new building, which is why we can't quantify what's available. We really want KDOT to come to us and say, hey, do you have about this much? And we can say, yes. Again, let's don't truck it all the way down. Let's take it down the street here and use it. So.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not a question or quick comment. Years ago, I trucked some asbestos from Lawrence to Topeka. They have at that time, and I'm guessing it still remains, a certified disposal site. So that would also be convenient, and I appreciate the care that's taken in managing that material.
There's a tremendous amount of asbestos every time we pull carpet out, the old tile. So there's a process you go through. That's why you use licensed, bonded, certified people that are responsible, because it's technically our product that needs to be removed until it gets into the landfill. So it's very important that that's done by someone who experienced in that area.
All right. Seeing no further questions. All right. I think it's lunch calling them. I think that's what it is. All right. Thank you for being here. I think we have to make a recommendation regarding the purchase of the building or the sale of those buildings. Okay. I think it would be appropriate if we're gonna bellyache that they didn't come to us. I think we ought to do something. All right, committee, we've completed everything on the agenda. The one thing that I would think would be appropriate would be to, in our advisory role regarding the sale of buildings by Commerce, to make an advisory statement regarding the sale of the buildings by Commerce. So do I have anyone who's got their thoughts in order on regarding those buildings and the disposition thereof? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A draft motion, and then we can hear comments, but that the committee agrees with the proposals to sell the buildings to the highest bidders. However, the committee would also like to state a concern that if a bid, that they might consider a process that if a bid is less than half of the appraised value, or, I mean, that's what we could work on. What might be appropriate to have as a, or we would like the department, let's start over on that second part. We would like the Department of Commerce to consider a procedure that would encourage a sale or a listing if a certain price is not reached in the bidding action. I think that might, and I would be certainly very interested if Senator Billinger has also comments on that.
Senator Billinger.
Thank you. I agree we should look at all options, you know, and it's a little less concerning when he said they did get a second appraisal later, which I wish they'd had that initially. You know, if you looked at an initial appraisal at 80,000, it brought 50, it wasn't quite as bad. But when you have an initial appraisal at $170,000 and it brings 50, that's pretty discouraging. I've dealt with real estate a little bit through my lifetime, and you know, I always try to buy low and sell high. And generally speaking, with what's going on with inflation, I would think if they bulldoze it, the lot in Salina, Kansas, probably worth $50,000. I don't know, but that wouldn't sound out of line to me. But yeah, I think you know, for doing a recommendation, a statement, I think that yes, you know, we should, you know, if it doesn't bring a particular amount and you get an appraisal, that we should look at other options. But I guess this is kind of water under the bridge. So thank you.
Well, and I think part of the problem with that arose with the appraisal itself, not taking into consideration what it was going to be what was going to be necessary in order to make it habitable. So I agree. Yes, if it comes in at half the appraised value, we need to revisit, or at least have a process in place to revisit. But I think at the same time, we also, part of that process needs to be to determine the validity of the appraised value to begin with. If it's $170,000 when fully operational, that's different than $170,000 as is. And so I'm not sure about the phrasing on this. Senator Francisco, throw me a lifeline here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just suggesting that the department have consider a proposal, not that we, because when I started to say 50%, I'm sort of going, that's too rigid, but that they might consider a way to address a situation where the bid is so different from the appraiser and appraisal, and appreciate Senator Bellinger's comment, that that actually didn't end up being the case. We had a lot of discussion before we learned that it was much more in line than what we had thought. But I'm just saying, since there was that discussion, to just say, we agree with the acceptance of these two bids, but we suggest, or we would appreciate, maybe we would appreciate knowing if the Kansas Department of Commerce has a procedure to look at the relationship between the appraisal and the bids. Maybe we could just ask that, and that they could report back to us so we would know. So that's a little change in the motion.
We're ready.
Yes, I agree. I don't want to make any changes to this statement that we are discussing, except I think we don't know what it would have taken to bring it back up. Maybe it would have been $100,000, $200,000 to make it even operational. But I just wanted to add to this that it's good to have both of those buildings back on the tax rolls. At the end of the day, when you put them back on the tax rolls, those property taxes are being collected by those communities, which in turn goes back into our residentials, hopefully having you being able to utilize those for services that are provided by those cities. So I think that is a positive in both of these aspects as far as the buildings being sold and being put back, because right now they're not getting anything for it.
Representative Alcala.
Well, I hate to kick a dead horse. It's already been turned into glue, but so we're just a committee of recommendation. So no matter what statement we put together, there's not going to be any authority behind it. They've already did what they need to do. It's happened in this committee before where it's bypassed this committee. So before somebody spends a lot of time on it, unless somebody really feels that, that puts a chip on their shoulder, I just think that if we send out any statement, it'd be that, we didn't review this prior to, but when we start putting a statement out and then but if it doesn't meet this criteria, but if it doesn't, that's just to satisfy us because it's not going to make a damn bit of difference. Thank you, Chairman.
I feel that way on almost all legislation we pass. All right. Is everyone good with it coming with the statement as it kind of developed? Did anyone take notes? Yeah, Jill, what did we say exactly?
So, sir, and members of the committee, what I got that is from Senator Francisco's motion is that the committee agrees with the proposal to sell the buildings, and the committee would like to know in the future if the Department of Commerce is considering using additional selling procedures if the bid is lower than the appraisal.
Senator Francisco, is that kind of like what you said?
That's quite like what I said. I'm wondering if it might be, that first part is certainly what we say, we agree with this, but if we just ask, can the Kansas Department of Commerce share any procedures they use if the, or do they have a policy if the bids are substantially less than the appraisal? And then we'd know what they do, and we could then go on other times and say, well, we know that they're looking at those things. Here's the process that they use. We're comfortable with that. I think it's more important that this committee knows that there's a process and what it is, and that we can share that then with members of the public.
Take it away, Jill.
So what you're saying is adding that is considering using or has developed procedures for additional selling procedures if the bid, because you want to know if they have procedures we're not aware of at this moment.
Yes.
Representative Alcala.
Just put a request into the department to send us the procedures in that process. I just don't see wasting a lot of staff time with the letter and this, and then somebody's doing this and that. Couldn't they just provide the procedures back to the committee as a whole?
Sir, I think that's what this anticipates, that we would like as staff, it just would be on our tickler list that when the department comes to present their 5-year plan, they would also address this issue.
All right. There was a motion made. I don't, there was never a second. Do I have a second? I'm prompting you. No, there's not a second. No one wants to make a statement. I will second it. All those, all those in favor of that statement, say aye. Opposed?
No.
The ayes appear to have it. You guys do have it. That will be the statement over the objection of Representative Delperday. All right. With that, ladies and gentlemen, oh, yes, Jill. All right. Yes, sure.
Just one more thing. You have also in your packet, that last piece of paper is from the State Board of Regents. One of the committee members had asked about possible travel to the universities. And so I asked the director of facilities to provide you with the projects for each of the universities. So you can look that over if you see any of those you want to travel to during the interim.
Okay, very good. Thank you. All right. Lunch has arrived. Before we adjourn, I do want to say that the other two items on our agenda here, touring, docking, and the KDHE lab, are not going to be part of any joint committee meeting whatsoever. We won't be discussing business. So we're going to adjourn the meeting now and then take our field trip, which will not be a part of this meeting. Everyone got that? Got that clear? I will not be the chairman over there. All right. All right. And with that, we are, oh, wait. One other thing. I do want to announce that our box lunches were provided to us by, Richard Frost is the one that's here, but he's afraid that they don't taste very good, so he wants to blame it on Scott Schneider Law Firm, representing the Association of General Contractors. All right. So with that, thank you for. I don't. Well, he's not even here now. Is he outside waiting for us? Okay, very good. So be sure to thank Richard and Scott if you happen to see him, although he's not here. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned.